Well, thank you for joining us. Just start off real quick. Tell us who you are and where you're from and why you're running.
Sure. Well, I'm David Watts and running for Texas Land Commissioner, of course. As a kid, I grew up around Houston. Later, after my freshman year of high school, we moved away to Kentucky and then finished high school and college up there. And we've been back in East Texas now since 1999, so about 15 years now. When I was in Kentucky, I ran for state rep up there. Loved the process. I didn't win, but it was a fabulous process. And then children came along, so refocused on raising the family. Now the kids are a good bit older and it's much easier. And so this seemed like an excellent opportunity to make a real difference in this race and to really champion conservative solutions. So, not many people know what the Land Commissioner job is. So tell us a little bit about what in your opinion, the Land Commissioner's job is, and why you want to do it. Sure. Well, there's really three big areas of work for the Land Commissioner. The first is to manage public land, and with that, there's about 13 million acres or so of public land to be managed. The job is to make money for education. So that's a fabulous work, really, to manage that public land and make money, and it flows right to education. So that's very important. The second key job is veterans benefits, helping administer veterans benefits here in Texas. And the third is history, helping preserve our history, old documents, land grant documents, maps, and so forth. Presently, the Alamo falls under that, to help manage and preserve the Alamo. There's a fourth area which is of interest, especially to folks on the coastline, and that is to help manage the coastline, erosion issues, oil spills, and so forth. And when you really look at that, there's very diverse work from land to veterans to history to coastline. It touches really every Texan very closely. And so I believe that when you have these executive branch agencies, you've got to have folks that are very committed to a constitutional perspective and who will manage that work very carefully. And so that really drove me to seek this office.
What do you think will be the three biggest challenges facing the land office in the next term?
Well, I think there's a general sort of systematic challenge with every executive branch agency. Executive branch agencies always seek to expand their scope and their power, and you can see it for example at the federal level with the EPA, always looking for more power while simultaneously making themselves insulated so we can't influence them. So there's that systematic challenge of how you keep that agency focused on its job to serve the public and not to expand its scope. But certainly a second key challenge specific to the work is the funding of education. How do we better manage the land to fund education properly? And that's really a key thing for us. Oil and gas has been excellent for Texas and continues to be, and we need to continue to encourage all of that kind of activity. But how else can we really maximize the public land to make money? I think the third area is simply, part of that key work is Texas veterans benefits. So we've got a lot of veterans now coming back, from the work they've done overseas. So how do we get more efficient, in trying to serve those veterans? I think that's a key challenge for us.
Recently, the EPA has come under a lot of fire for turning a blind eye to wind companies for killing our national bird, the bald eagle. Considering the land office leases state lands to wind companies, or potentially, what can the land office do to prevent our national bird being killed so often?
Right. Well, in general terms, and you want to lease the land for anything that's legitimate, that'll generate revenue. In general, when you're talking about sort of the renewable or the green energies, be it solar or be it wind, I believe those have got to carry their own weight. You know, there should be no state money at risk, or in other words, we should not lease the land for less just because it's wind or solar. That's the kind of first principle. The land has to generate market kind of revenue to the very best of our ability. Second, and I think it's important that you look at the impact of anything you're doing, whether it's oil and gas or hydraulic fracking or wind or solar. What's the negative of those things? And if there is evidence that we're killing a lot of birds, especially bald eagles, which is sensitive to all of us, then I think we need to look hard at that. Now, there may be leases in place, and there may be commitments for a period of time, but maybe as those leases come due, maybe there's something else we can do that's better and has less impact.
Recently, there was a lot of controversy over the potential of the Alamo becoming a UN World Heritage Site.
Sure.
I know you've publicly opposed it. The General Land Office says that this status won't affect ownership or control of the Alamo. How will you handle this situation if you become land commissioner?
Right. Well, I intend to oppose it, and if it is in place before I assume office, if I'm asked by the people to serve, then I intend to find a way to undo it. The issue is, and there's two things the General Land Office has said. One I believe is right, and one I believe is wrong. The UN will not have authority or ownership. We agree on that. But the GLO has also said this is merely a tourism designation, and that's wrong. It's not. It is an invitation for UN influence. I have a second draft of the application that the folks down in San Antonio have prepared. It's about 400 plus pages. You don't need 400 pages just to get a tourism designation.
It's not very green, is it, to use that much paper?
Right, exactly. It's and the philosophy of the UN. In fact, there's a book now. The agency that oversees these World Heritage Sites is called UNESCO, and UNESCO publishes a book, and it's on their website, called A Guide for Site Managers of UN World Heritage Sites. In the foreword of that book, the first paragraph of the foreword, the first sentence or two of the first paragraph of the foreword, written by the head of UNESCO, at least the head as of 2002, said the fundamental philosophy of this program is that these sites belong to everybody. I say that's just wrong. That's the UN mentality. The Alamo doesn't belong to everybody. You know, it belongs to Texans. We paid for it with blood. So there's just this influence that is unnecessary and unwarranted. It's already happening. In June 20, the San Antonio Express covered a meeting, the mayor, the city council, and so forth, considering the proposal to build Joski's Tower, if you're familiar with the development that's of interest down there, about a block and a half from the Alamo. It falls within the buffer zones. That's one of the things the UN expects, is there to be a buffer zone where you control development around these sites. Now, we agree we wouldn't want to put a 7-Eleven right next door to the Alamo, but we know how to do that. We don't need UN influence to do it. Anyway, the director of the National Park Service is quoted in that article from June 20, told the mayor and the city council, if you approve this, you jeopardize your UN designation. The mayor said, quote, we will do nothing to jeopardize our UN designation. And thus, at least in that meeting, they rejected the development. So it's influence, that's the concern.
Really, I think the biggest issue when we saw that in the constitutional amendment election is one of the biggest issues facing Texas is water. Right. With all the land that you're going to manage, what can the land commissioner do to help us alleviate our water concerns?
Sure. Well, one thing the GLO has already begun, and I think it's a smart move, is to begin researching and experimenting and testing desalinization technology. There are, in many places, there are underwater reserves, brackish water reserves. Obviously, we can't drink that. That's salty water. It's not as salty as the ocean, but it's salty. But desalinization technologies, we can pump that up, desalinate it, and at least turn it into irrigation type water. What I would suggest is that we need to take a hard look There are public lands. If there are significant brackish water reserves, we need to encourage companies to lease that land from us for the purpose of desal plants. Now, it seems to me that helps in two ways. Number one, it helps generate state revenue, leasing more land. And number two, those companies can then sell the water and help supplement what we need in the state. That's also possible certainly along the ocean in places where it makes sense. You don't want to disturb the beaches in a terrible sort of way, but there may be opportunities to do that along the ocean as well. So I think we keep looking at that, keep experimenting, keep seeing if that's viable.
Let's talk about the race a little bit. As of yesterday, it's just two candidates right now,
right.
Or until basically March is going to decide
right.
who's going to be land commissioner. You've criticized your opponent for being just an extension of a family dynasty.
Right.
Do you think that's really a fair assessment, or do you think his candidacy is sincere?
Yeah, well, I think he is sincere, of course, in his interest to serve the state. He does represent, however, the fourth generation of a political dynasty, and that alone would not be such a concern if he were using that position of influence, and he has certainly done a tremendous amount of fundraising. If he were using that position of influence to really champion conservative solutions. We follow him, of course, from time to time, and what you see is generally sound bites and platitudes. In other words, it's possible for someone to say, well, I'm pro-business, I'm pro-gun, I'm pro-family, I'm pro-life, and therefore I'm a conservative. But we can do a lot better. We can actually articulate and explain. So what we do when we talk about the work of the land commissioner, it is about funding education. It's not about education reform. It's about funding it. It's about taking care of veterans. And here's how we can do that better. Here's how we can preserve history better, what we can do at the Alamo that's better, that's conservative. So anyway, I think it's a fair characterization. We're very specific. We find our opponent to be very much sort of a soundbite candidate.
Well, on that, we've looked at his platform, and if you go to his campaign website, you only see one issue: education.
Right.
Nothing about revenue or property management. But he does talk about how he wants to use the influence of the land commissioner's office to affect school policy, school choice, academic standards. Can a land commissioner truly affect education policy, and if so, would you do so?
Sure. There are opportunities as any statewide official to speak out, whether it be the Second Amendment, whether it be property rights, or whether it be education and the approach we take for education in the state. So I think it is possible to speak out and influence. I think the interesting challenge for our opponent is he's got such a heavy connection with those who have not only favored but actually implemented sort of a federalization approach of education. So whether it be George W. with No Child Left Behind, whether it be Jeb Bush with Common Core, there's a tremendous amount of connection there with those who favor sort of a top-down federalized mandate approach. Now, we think that's totally the wrong approach. When I'm asked about education reform, here's what I've said as I've talked to superintendents around the state. We often hear we need to get DC out of education, and we do. But we need to get Austin out of education, frankly, as well. If each independent school district was truly independent and autonomous, I believe the local community would realize now they have real influence and would really get engaged. Today, so much is dictated by the state, by the feds. In a sense, you can't blame parents for not participating and influence in the process because they feel they have so little influence. But if you could strip away all that and truly have local autonomous control, that would make a huge difference, I believe.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us. How can more people find out about your campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly our website, wattsfortexas.org, and certainly on Facebook as well. They can search for Watts for Texas. And we're there, we're active, and and certainly contact us that way.
Well, thanks again for joining us, and best of luck to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.